Hi there fabric jugglers, it's Babs here from Fiery Phoenix, and today I am going to be taking you through a tutorial to create a flat felled seam. Now this is the seam that is most traditionally found on the inner leg of apparently incredibly filthy, dirty jeans, which belong to my daughter, so I apologise for the dirt, ignore that. What we're looking at is the flat felled seam here. It's also been used on the reverse of the jeans, and it's a very decorative stitch, but it's also a very strong stitch, and it's used to have strength. It's used for a flat seam so that you don't have a big bulk of fabric where you're working with a heavier weight fabric, and it also ensures a nice smooth feel, a smooth edge on the inside of the garment. So this tutorial will be taking you through how to make a true flat fell seam, and also I'll be adding in as a little bonus a cheats or faux flat fell seam. So stick around and let's see what we can come up with. So now we're going to start sewing our flat felled seam. We need to have wrong sides of the fabric together to start off with, and we will be sewing our seam line 1.5 centimetres in from the edge, which for me aligns with one of the lines on my stitch plate. So take your tape measure out, measure that for yourself and work out where that is. Now this is one of those times where we really need to pay attention to the width of our seam allowance. What we'll be doing now is pressing this open and deciding which way is the front of the garment and which way is the back. And once we've pressed the seam open, we'll trim off down to about 1/4 inch the seam that is towards the back of the garment, and then we will fold over the side that is towards the front and then wrap it around and press the whole thing across. Once it's pressed across to the final position, we can from the front top stitch down and keep everything neatly aligned. So I'm just going to go off to the iron and I'll see you in a moment. We'll just clear away some of these loose stitches that we don't need, loose threads. As you can see, this has now been pressed open, and I've decided that this side will be the reverse or the back of the seam and this will be the front of the seam. So I now need to trim down this side. I could use a ruler, however I'm not actually, I'm going to switch that around. The reason I'm going to switch that around is that actually this side is a more stable seam, and this side the fabric actually wobbles. So if we're going to be trimming, folding and sewing in place, this little kink, this wobble isn't going to work for me. So as I don't actually have to have one side or another being front, I shall take the opportunity to change my mind and work with what is going to give me the nicest seam. So this is a much more even edge to the seam, and so I shall trim down the wobbly edge, which becomes quite narrow at this point for some reason. So it's always worth paying attention, and feel free to change your mind if that's what works for your garment or your make. So we'll trim down this side. If you have a rotary cutter and you have a straight line, you can use a rotary cutter with a board. For the ease of this particular tutorial, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to use my scissors to show that it is perfectly possible with scissors to cut a nice even line. And now that we have that edge out of the way, we can then go and press 1/4 inch in from the edge and then roll that over. And as you can see, that's starting to create a much nicer look already. So I'll just pop back to the ironing board. Here we have the short side pressed, the long side has been folded across and pressed over, and now as you can hopefully see, when this is folded over, we now have a nice flat even layer of fabric enclosing those raw edges. So all we do now is simply take a top stitch down this outer edge to encase everything. So let's just get that done. I tend to move the needle across to the right so that I've got the weight of the needle holding the fabric down, holding it in place where I want it to be. But by moving the needle across to the right, it gives me more control over the edge position. And this is what happens when you don't use a sewing spider. I'll start that again. Clear out that fabric, or rather that thread that we don't want in there. And yet again, proving that everyone makes mistakes and nobody is perfect. Take that out. Grab a spider, or create a spider. For those who don't know, a sewing spider is just a piece of scrap fabric. Fold it over in half and run through to capture any nasty grots and grollies with the threads. There's a tutorial on sewing spiders which I will post a link to in the video somewhere. So we'll fold this back round and start again. All those grots and grollies being caught elsewhere now on that other piece of fabric. We can begin. And again, take your time when you're doing this. There's no point rushing it. Any time that you've had to press fabric, it's well worth taking the time to make sure that it'll... Ow, that was my elbow. It's well worth taking the time when you're doing the final top stitch rather than rushing through and either falling off the edge or not allowing it to flatten nicely. Now you can choose to either measure for your top stitch from the edge of the fold or from the stitches that you took initially. That's a personal preference depending on the garment and the effects that you're looking for. Now we're nearly done. Now that we've snipped off the sewing spider from the top edge, you can see that we have a nice even flat felled seam. It's not got any loose edges showing along this side. It's nice and flat. It is very tough. It's very strong. It'll take a lot of pressure. You can see why it's used on denim jeans. And from the reverse, again, you can see there are no raw edges. And just a single stitch line on the inside and a nice double row on the outside. So now that I've shown you how to create a traditional or formal flat felled hem, what I'm going to do is show you how to do the cheats version. If you don't want to be messing around like that, although I don't consider that to be an awful lot of messing about, you can do a cheat version so that it looks the same from the front, but it looks very, very different from the back. In this version, you would sew right sides together, and again, I've left a nice wide 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and you can either sew with a zigzag, in which case you would need to trim this down, or as I'm going to show you, I'm going to sew and trim at the same time using my serger. I don't think anyone's seen me use my serger yet, so this will be a first. I just need to double check everything's actually still in shot, because it's a much higher machine to sew with and video on than my sewing machine. So we'll just pop this in, and what a serger does is enclose all the raw edges and actually trim off fabric at the same time. So there is in actual fact a blade just here. So you need to be very careful with fingers. when you're using a serger, but they are fast, they are neat, and they are fun to use. So here we go. As I use my sewing machine pedal. Let's try that again with the serger pedal. And it's that fast and it's that simple. So what you need to do is make sure that you keep your serging on the outer side of the, is that in shot? Yes, on the outer side of the hemline, the stitch line. If you overrun it, then it's not going to look very pleasant from the other side. And then what you would do is simply turn the fabric over. But what we're going to do is actually sew over the top again with a regular sewing machine. So we've got this beautifully encased or enclosed raw edge, but what we're going to do is sew down the top from the front. So I'll just switch back over to my sewing machine. Switch the pedals around and make sure you can actually see what I'm doing. Lots of scuffing noises, sorry about that. Okay. So now we need to make sure that that we know which side our serger is gone, our serging has gone, and that should be to the back, the reverse of our stitching. And then simply, I'm going to move that back to the centre position, simply run a line of stitching down the top to trap that. So then we've got our stitches that are trapped on the back, and we've got a top stitch line which goes very wobbly for me for some reason on the top, and you can of course add a second line of top stitching if you wish to complete the effect. I'm going to do a complete line because this is just a sample. And so there is your fake 2 rows fake or faux flat fell seam effect. Again, go slowly, don't rush, and then you can actually get much neater top stitching than I've achieved today. But then I am human, I am not perfect. So hopefully that's given you 2 examples of how you can create a fantastically strong, neat and comfortable flat fell seam. So we have the faux seam here with the rather messy looking, but trying to make it as neat as possible, overlocking on the reverse. And then we have the true flat fell seam, which to my mind is just as simple. So hopefully by showing you examples of these 2 seams, it's going to give you some inspiration, some choices for a method that can be incorporated into future projects. If this has been useful to you, then please give the video a thumbs up. Please like and feel free to share. If this is your first time here today, then hi, welcome. Just to let you know, I release videos on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and I also run a Starting to Sew group on Facebook, which has around 1,800 members at the moment, I think. It has members from worldwide, all across the globe, and there's always going to be somebody online who can answer questions if you have any questions or concerns. So it's a very friendly group. There's a link in the description box below. Pop along and have a look, and hopefully you'll find some very helpful people there to help you out if you've got any queries. We also like showing off a little bit. And so there's a load of inspirational photos of first projects, advanced projects, fun projects. So just have a look around and see what you like. If you like what you've seen on the channel, and then pop back regularly every Tuesday and Thursday, as I've said. However, if you don't want the faff of that and you just want new videos to drop into your YouTube feed, then click the subscribe button. That's the simplest way to do that, and then it just drops straight into your feed for you without having to go look for it. But hopefully this won't be the only time you visit, and hopefully I shall see you again in future videos. Bye for now.